many choices, the lady speaks. We're grateful you chose to be here today with us because I know you have many choices in how you spend your Sundays. And we're glad you chose to be with us. Because we're waiting on the school to open to renters, we are going to be online at least until September. And that's what's true. If you would like to see some of the reopening guidelines that are available, send a note to the office and we will send you piles of papers electronically so you can see what the rules look like when we start imagining ourselves reconvening. Because we will. I mean, it's just a matter of when. It's not a matter of if. So I have a lot to talk about today. Shelley mentioned solstice and I'd forgotten, heavens, I'd forgotten solstice. We've also got Juneteenth yesterday, Father's Day today, and we are continuing with our monthly book study on Rick Hanson's Resilient. So I'm going to get right to it because there is a lot of going on, a lot of activity and information that's available right now. And as you know, I call these talks reminders because mostly I'm reminding you of what you already know. Mostly. So 156 years ago yesterday, on June 19th, Major General Gordon Granger read the contents of General Order Number 3, which he had written to the people of Galveston, Texas, spreading the word that slavery had been abolished 2.5 years earlier by President Abraham Lincoln when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And you know that information didn't always travel as fast as it does right now. So 2.5 years, I guess, is not bad back then. And those 250,000 enslaved Black Texans were granted freedom and liberation on that day. And that day, June 19th, has been celebrated as a day of emancipation from slavery all across the United States. Juneteenth. And this holiday was first celebrated in Texas. And it's been formally and informally recognized and celebrated over the years in many of the 50 states. And as you know, this past week, President Joe Biden recognized it as a federal holiday. It's a start. It's a place we move into, towards recognizing the equality and the equity and the unity of all. And today is Father's Day, as you've heard other people say. Father's Day was founded in Spokane, Washington in 1910 by a woman, Sonora Smart Dodd. Her father was a Civil War veteran. And he, as a single parent, raised 6 children in Spokane. And after hearing a sermon about Anna Jarvis's Mother's Day celebration in 1909, Sonora told her minister that fathers should have the same holiday. And she initially suggested her father's birthday, which was June 5th, but the pastors of the Spokane Ministerial Alliance couldn't get their act together fast enough to do it that day. So the celebration was deferred to the 3rd Sunday of June, and that's where it stuck. So today we recognize all fathers, those that are biological, those that are step, those that are adopted, those that are grandfathers, and those who have been involved in fathering, guiding, guarding, directing, supporting others. And there is a cultural belief, an unconscious bias that has to have some historical basis, otherwise it wouldn't exist. That the mothering figure is usually the nurturing parent, and the fathering figure is usually the guiding one. I'm not saying it's universally true, but it is a cultural belief. It is something that is embedded in the collective unconscious. And it's been there a really long time. Some sociologists believe that the first recognizable division of parenting happened about 12,000 years ago. I can't say, I wasn't there. And we all know exceptions to this collectively held story. We all know women like my sister who have, by choice or by need, served as both the nurturing parent and the guiding parent. And a certain percentage of men, like Sonoran Smart Dodd's dad, who served both functions as well. And then last week, Gary Lynn Floyd talked about using our divine imagination to support our own personal experience of a life of our choosing. And if you happen to be in Shelley's meditation this morning, you heard her read from Ernest Holmes, This Thing Called You, where he's saying the same thing. We have to envision a life that we choose in order to have the experience. Well, last week, Gary didn't talk a lot about the material that formed the basis of his talk. Neville Goddard, was a teacher, and he was a teacher in the US and in the Caribbean. And in this particular talk of his, called The Power of Imagination, he discusses some conversations he had with a spiritual teacher of his in New York City. The fellow's name was Abdullah, and he may have been Ethiopian, maybe not. We don't know much about him. We do know that Abdullah was completely clear in his understanding of how law, the creative process, and cause and effect actually work. And I say those words like they're different things, but we know, when we remember, that we are describing the same process. And we don't have to know that this process exists for it to work in our lives. What we believe, what we really truly believe in our lives, is what shows up for us. That's how law works. That's how creative process works. That's how cause and effect work. And because we've thought the thought, we can change the thought and we can have a different experience. That's the power of imagination. That's the power of understanding what we believe and knowing we can use it to our good and for the good of all. But anyway, the short version of Neville's story is he wanted to go home to Barbados, and he didn't have the money for a ticket on the ship. Abdullah reminded him over and over and over again to see himself on the ship, to see himself landing in Barbados, to see himself with his family, and not to worry particularly about how it would happen. Neville used his imagination to create this desired good in his mind, and it happened exactly that way. And the how was most unexpected. Gary reminded us that we can choose to do this too. Now, if this story sounds a little bit familiar to you, it's very similar to the story that Genevieve Barron told in her book, Your Invisible Power. She described being totally clear, totally committed to traveling to England to study with Judge Thomas Troward, who didn't take students. He didn't, he wouldn't, he never had, he never would. But she saw herself studying with him in person. And so the universe conspired to deliver to her the thing she imagined in her consciousness. And she was totally clear. So of course, he did take students. And of course, she did study with him. And of course, she did end up with money for the steamer ticket. And she did have money to be in England for a while. And while many people have read Thomas Troward, and including Neville, including Ernest Holmes, she was his only formal official student. So why is it so hard for us to acknowledge and own up to what we desire? Rick Hanson calls it being on our own side, being our own cheerleader, being our own ally. We're back to that cultural bias or that collective unconscious conditioning voice. That critical voice that asks you and me, how dare we want something? How dare we actually express opinions? How dare we actually desire or want something different, better for ourselves? The answer is individual. And we have to remember that we do, in fact, deserve it. Here's a place that this month's book study, Rick Hanson's Resilient, can help us out. During the first Sunday of the month, I talked about how we manage our challenges, how we protect our vulnerabilities, and how we increase our resources. Our most dependable and most easily managed resource is the one that goes on inside our heads. It's in how we think about and how we choose to see what happens in our three-dimensional world. The first week, I spoke about self-compassion, taking our own side against those negative voices that we have all internalized from our history, from things that people have said to us, well-meaning things usually, but we don't hear them that way. And we internalize them as negative and critical and limiting voices. We have to take that idea, those ideas, and turn them and change them to see them as something we can use to support ourselves with. And the other thing, we have to accept the experiences we're having and not wish that they're different. Because if we're resisting our experience, then there's no way for us to move with them. We're spending all of our energy fighting. And we have to remember not to let those experiences dictate how we engage with them. They sound simple when I say them like this, but they're actually very huge ideas. And they're embedded in this teaching, Science of Mind, because we have to remember that we must be our own friend. We have to remember that conditions are created by beliefs and we can change them. And the third thing we have to remember is we need to enjoy our experience of being alive. Because we can be miserable and be alive. There's nothing that makes us enjoy being alive. We have to decide that we will choose to relish this thing called life. And then I mentioned previously, living mindfully, living present to our lives, being aware of what's going on is the only place we have power, where we can change how we react and change how we see and change how we view those experiences and seeing them positively. And then we build our own safety net. We build our own sanctuary. We build that safe cushion to fall back on momentarily and catch our breath and remember our center when it gets hard, when life gets hard. So last week in the email, Ryan Holiday wrote a post in his Daily Stoic, which I thought was particularly appropriate. And you know, I'm a fan of the Stoics, and I think that there's a lot of merit to that way of seeing the world and being in it. Not completely, because I don't agree with everything the Stoics believe, but this business of owning our agency, owning our option, our ability to choose and decide is key. So Ryan was comparing what Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, went through with our experience of COVID-19. And Ryan wrote, "There's no question in my mind that the last year has been tragic. Millions of people have perished in a merciless pandemic. Millions more are still dealing with the consequences on all levels of their lives. And what would the Stoics say to this? And yeah, so that's life. especially Marcus Aurelius, who was emperor during a 15-year-long plague. 15 years. And some people say that it was plague that actually killed him, and much greater hardships than we've had in these last 16 months or so. And the worst part, he was emperor, so he figured he ought to be able to do something about it. And he couldn't, except change his mind about how he saw it. And he reminded himself in his meditations that history has always been difficult, that life has always been filled with events like this, and that it was just his turn in the barrel. Mostly, the Stoics would ask, so what did you learn about this? What did you learn about yourself from this experience that you've had? Did you learn what matters to you and what doesn't? We've had lots of conversations about this in morning practice, how, being just so and being so tidy and all that other isn't so important now. And I think that's a fabulously good thing. Another question, did you learn how to be more patient? Did you learn how to deal with or recognize or address or calm your own anxiety? Did you learn how your actions affect other people? Did you learn how interconnected all of our lives automatically are? Did you learn how vulnerable our world is, how vulnerable our own safety net is, and how fragile life can be sometimes? And the big one for me, did you learn that you were stronger than you thought you were? Back to Ryan, to not learn from the events of the pandemic would be to add impiety. I think that's a funny word, to add impiety on top of the tragedy. In fact, the ability to learn from and grow from and to find meaning in our experience, according to Viktor Frankl, is one of the few powers we puny humans really have in this life. The events of the last year have been trying. They've been unpredictable and they've been hard. They've also been instructive if we choose to see them that way. Why on earth would you choose to see them any other way? In our book study last Tuesday night, we started talking about our inner resources, grit. What we think of as resourcefulness really is about experiencing and owning our own agency, our own personal sense of authority and autonomy, our own ability to decide what happens in our lives or how we see what happens, how we perceive it, and how we choose to respond to each situation. One of the things we talked about a good while is culturally, there's a bias towards learned helplessness. The notion that I can't do anything about this, so why even try? This is in the collective unconscious. This is a commonly held belief. And if we don't pick differently, we will default to this belief. I'll just leave that there on the table. We don't have to default to learned helplessness. We have the ability, the power to choose, even if it's just a tiny, tiny thing. Rick wrote in his book, typically it takes many experiences of agency to compensate for a single experience of helplessness, which is just another example of the brain's negativity bias. To prevent helplessness in the first place, or gradually unlearn it, we need to look for experiences in which we make a choice, or we influence an outcome, or we see our experience with different eyes. To remember what it feels like to be a metaphorical hammer, that active agent, and not the nail without options. This is a basic teaching of the science of mind. We are able, always, if we're paying attention, to work with mental causes and not be at the effect of the conditions or the situations. Determination or steadfast fortitude is another component of grit. Thich Nhat Hanh, that very soft, gentle Buddhist teacher and peace activist, has been described as being like a cloud, a butterfly, and a bulldozer. Intentional, determined, resolved, patient, persistent, and fierce. Each of us has the capacity at all times to increase our expression of determination, to decide and then to act in ways that increase our resolve, patience, persistence, and fierceness. The third component of grit is vitality. Remember, paying attention to and taking care of our physical bodies allow us to experience and express life. One of my favorite sentences from last week's reading: we need to accept, appreciate, and nurture our body and treat it more like a friend rather than a disposable beast. The big idea from chapter 5, the next chapter, was gratitude, feeling thankful for all of life. Holmes wrote, and you know this quote from page 497 of The Science of Mind, an attitude of gratitude is most salutary. It bespeaks the realization that we are now in heaven. Now in heaven, not later. And that means we choose to decide to see it that way. Part of that, and part of this explanation of gratitude, is recognizing healthy pleasures and allowing ourselves to enjoy them. Cultural conditioning, thank you, Puritans, is that pleasure is somehow evil, or it's for later. Life is for suffering, and later we get to have heaven. Heaven is now. Heaven might be movement, walking, swimming, yoga, stretching, dancing, playing music, doing Tai Chi if it's not 112, cooking something delicious and sharing it with people, aromas and scents that you love, paying time to notice these simple pleasures, these simple delights in our lives. After having a week of absurd temperatures, we look forward to seeing those rain clouds. They are coming, monsoons are coming. We can take pleasure in knowing that. We can also take pleasure in things like the taste of cool water, or chocolate, or coffee, or whatever it is for you. And when we stop to notice these simple pleasures, we reinforce in ourselves our ability to be grounded and solid and present in ourself, which adds to our resilience. The third piece of the gratitude story is feeling successful. And I know we have this grand, huge story that we're not successful until everybody knows our name and all that other stuff. But really, every single day has hundreds of opportunities to notice and feel simple, everyday successes. Fixing a meal is a success, paying a bill, reading a book to a child, finishing a crossword puzzle, watering the plants. Rick wrote, every day is full of opportunities to take in experiences of successful goal attainment. Doing this builds up an internal sense of being a success, which helps us weather those critical statements and helps us be less dependent on approval from other people. Also, feeling successful deep down can help people lighten up and take themselves less seriously. That sounds like a beneficial outcome, doesn't it? There's a lot more, but I'll close with that for now. And we continue this week with the third section on Tuesday evening at 5:30. So how do we become more resilient in our daily lives, more able to exude calm, strength, and happiness? We all already know the answer to this question. It's really easy to know, and it's very challenging to do. Bad joke. It's the same way we get to Carnegie Hall if we wanted to be a performing artist. Practice, practice, practice. Holmes said it this way in The Science of Mind, pages 184 and 185. We deal with an impersonal principle. It operates for one just as quickly as for another, because it is the capital L law. Dare to speak and know that what you speak is the law unto the things spoken, regardless of what conditions exist. One alone in consciousness with the infinite constitutes a complete majority. You don't even have to wait for anybody to agree with you. One alone in consciousness constitutes a complete majority. Knowing this in your thought, work in perfect peace and calm. Capital letters, he's yelling, always expect the good. Have enthusiasm, and above all, have a consciousness of love, a radiant feeling flowing through your consciousness at all times. We must seek to realize this spiritual universe, regardless of any conditions that appear, if we will embody this greatest good. Disregarding all evidence to the contrary, the student of truth will maintain that they live in a perfect universe among people potentially perfect. They will regulate their thinking to meet this necessity and refuse to believe the opposite. And then the how? To daily meditate on the perfect life and to daily embody this great ideal. It's the royal road to freedom, to that peace that passes all understanding, and to the happiness that is the soul of all humanity. Resilience, which seems so necessary and so beneficial to anybody living in our world right now, is an inside job. And every single one of us already has all the tools we need. We need to remember that we have them, both the ability and the tools, and then consistently and persistently employ them. So I want to close with one of my favorite songs from India Ari, I Am Light. This is already true for each of us. I am light. I am not the things my family did. I am not the voices in my head. I am not the pieces of brokenness inside. I am light. I am not the mistakes I have made or anything that has caused me pain. I'm not the pieces of the dream I left behind. I am light. I am not the color of my eyes. I am not the skin on the outside. I'm not my age. I'm not my race. My soul inside is all light. I am divinity defined. I am the God on the inside. I am a star. I am a piece of it all. I am light. So what does it take for us to remember that we are already light? We are already whole. We are already that perfect emanation of the divine presence living in us and as us right now. Right now. Consider that. And I'm going to move straight into the prayer. I remember this thing called light. I remember this love, peace, and power. I remember this poise, this calm, this ease that is that whole and holy presence that infills and surrounds each one and all. And desires to become expressed. Each one of us has that opportunity in every moment to remember and enact as light, as love, as joy, as peace, as harmony. Because that presence and power lives as us already. It just waits our agreement, our concurrence, our decision to live that way and be that force for good in our world. And it is through those practices of resolve and persistence and gratitude and joy. And I know each one already lives as that divine presence and can continue to express more. Grateful for this awareness, grateful for this knowing. I feel able to see myself and all as this expression of the one life. My world brightens when I remember to do that, because I see life as for me. I see life as beneficial for me and for all, because each walks in and has that light of themselves. Grateful for this knowing, grateful for this awareness. I bless this day. I bless each one of us who chooses to engage in life in this way. And each one of us that struggles with it too, because it's a practice. And I know that each lives in the opportunity. And I feel grateful for that too, because seeing that allows me to remember to engage. In joy and delight, I engage in experiencing this great good. I know this truth for one and all, and I let it be. And so it is.